Dear Rector, dear Deans, dear colleagues, dear students, welcome, good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be introducing our guest speaker, Michael Apple. We share the same alma mater with him. It's an honor for me to be sharing the same alma mater, Teachers College, Columbia University, with him as well. Michael needs little introduction, but I have a few things to say before his talk. Professor Dr. Michael Apple is John Bascom Professor of Curriculum and Instruction and Educational Policy Studies at University of Wisconsin-Madison since 1991. Professor Apple's research centers on the limits and possibilities of critical educational policy and practice in a time of conservative restoration. He focuses on the relationship between culture and power in education and in democratizing educational policy and practice. He has honorary doctorates from National University of Rosario and University of La Pampa in Argentina, University of London Institute of Education in England, East China Normal University in China, and McGill University in Canada. Professor Apple has published more than 45 books and book chapters. Many of them have been translated into several languages, including Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, Greek, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Taiwanese, Hindu, Serbian, and Turkish. Some of his books are, starting from the latest, Can Education Change Society by Routledge, 2013, which is being translated into Turkish as we speak. Education and Power, again by Routledge, 2011. Global Crisis, Social Justice and Education, 2010. And many others. Professor Apple has more than 300 journal articles and essays, and his work has been awarded as outstanding by several scholarly associations in the past 20 years. His books, such as Ideology and Curriculum, 2004, and Official Knowledge, 2000, have been selected as some of the most important books of the 20th century. Professor Apple has been named as one of the 50 most influential writers in education in the 20th century, and he has been known as a public intellectual. This is how he would like himself to be referred to, as public intellectual. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Michael Apple.
It's working. Can you hear me in the back? Good. That's the end of my lecture. It is a pleasure to be here in many ways because coming to METU feels again like I'm coming home. In part because of the reputation of the university, which is simply superb in the United States and elsewhere, the quality of its students, its social commitments, and its history, and its ongoing history as a source where people do not simply accept policies that are undemocratic. And the students and faculty have historically embodied that in their daily lives. It's coming home in a different way, which is a little less positive. I am from the state of Wisconsin, which was the home of United States socialism, and it is now the home of authoritarian populist religious government. So I am here feeling very comfortable in a way that is both positive and negative. But it's also important that I say another thing. I am here speaking English, and you have done me the honor and given the respect of listening to me in English. Yet English is an imperial language. It is both necessary, yet as I speak, in a nation that has such a long cultural history of great literature, great science, great medicine, great architecture, great music, dance, in many ways the home of some of the most important works in the history of humankind, it is an odd feeling to be speaking in Anatolia and elsewhere in Turkey in a language that is mine. So oddly enough, I want to engage in a bit of an apology. One, to thank you, but the other is to feel a little odd that I am from what we in the United States of a progressive call the belly of the beast. That is one of the largest empires right now. And whether I like it or not, I am positioned then in a slightly imperial way. So again, thank you. I know 2 or 3 words of Turkish. I am not supposed to say them in public. But afterwards, if there is a bottle of raka here, I promise to say them. Okay. You'll forgive the slight attempts at humor. My last name, I mentioned this morning in the seminar with students and faculty. I have a last name called Apple. And I spent many years teaching in urban and rural schools, poor schools in the United States. And my first 3 years was as what we call a substitute teacher, someone who would call up the local Ministry of Education every day and be told at 6 in the morning which school I should go to. And if you have a new group of children or youth who must listen to you, and you must tell them every day, "Hello, children, my name is Mr. Apple," it takes them 5 or 6 hours to get off the light fixtures to calm down. So because of that, my pedagogic style often is somewhat humorous. As I mentioned this morning, do not misinterpret my feeble attempts at humor. What I plan to talk about is deadly serious. It is an issue of symbolic violence, to quote Bourdieu, and real violence in many places. And since Turkey, as I will say, like the United States, is a vast experiment, and the issue is an experiment in what? It means, again, that when I say things that are crucial, I will leaven them a little bit with attempts to be a little funny, since it is a public presentation. But again, please understand that what you are facing here is going on in all too many institutions and education systems in the entire world. All right, I want to raise a question in my presentation today, a question that is the heart of the text that I prepared as a more formal presentation, and that is a question that should guide any of us in education, and by that I do not mean schools, community literacy centers, it's schools of engineering, it's schools of social sciences, it's anyone who teaches humanities, it's people working in communities. Education is broader than these institutions where we sit. And the issue that I've spent my entire life trying to understand is a simple one, but it is the hardest question I think many of us have ever faced in our lives, since we did not come into education to get rich. If you did, you may leave this room now because you have what Marx called false consciousness. We are not doing this for money, I assure you. And if you are, could I ask who your agent is? Because this is not going to happen, I assure you. So the question is a simple one: can education change society? And as I talk, the first half will be a lament about what education is doing right now. And I want to talk about neoliberalism, but not only neoliberalism, since I think we radically simplify what our problems are, and hence make very unfortunate decisions about policy and practice. But I want us again to think carefully about what our role is in social transformation, since most of us think of education and our commitments, our labor in it, our intellectual work, as somehow not geared only to personal advancement, but to try and make a difference in the lives of our students and ourselves. But in doing this, in this first half being a lament and the second half being what we might think of as what should we do and who the we is, which is a very complicated question, I want us to remember how many gains have been made. Since discouraged right now, especially when universities are being attacked, when academicians for peace, as an example, who at this university in Boğaziçi and many other universities have been in jail or under threat. Some of them have lost their jobs. This is a difficult time as education becomes increasingly politicized. But of course, education has always been politicized. It's about whose knowledge is taught, who benefits. So I want to start out with what will seem like an odd beginning. And that is taken from a teacher's diary in the first public schools of the city of Boston in the United States in 1898. It is a teacher who has been told by the managerial people in the Ministry of Education in the city that she is going to be evaluated to see if she has a permanent job. Her name is Emma. I will not cross-dress, okay, but think of me, please, as not Michael, but Michelle. Okay, so I am now Emma. And this is Emma's words. I have this horrible habit of wanting to listen to teachers. I think that's actually the first step in being wise when we're talking about education. We might want to listen to some students as well. So Emma has just been told that the principal is coming in. These are now her words. Oh my God, the principal of my school has told me that he will come in to observe me tomorrow. I know what he will do. Oh my God, I hope he doesn't, but I know what he will do. He will choose a student at random to speak and then to read in public. What if he chooses the wrong child? Oh my God, what if he chooses the wrong child? The next day, the principal comes into her classroom. Emma's words again. I knew the proper way to read in my school was to say to the child, always say page 35, chapter 4, always hold the book in the right hand, never the left hand. Hold your head straight and high. Make certain that your toes are pointing at a perfect angle of 45 degrees. And I knew I should tell the child to lift up his voice and say things in loud, unnatural tones as he was reading. Oh, my dear God, I had remembered the position of the toes. I remembered to tell the child about the right arm, not the left. I remembered to tell the child about the nose. But I forgot to enforce the mentioning of page and chapter. The principal has left my room and slammed the door. I think my teaching career is at an end. I could end this here. We could laugh a bit about it and say, well, it's interesting about oh my God, because my reaction to this diary is oh my God. But at the same time, by the way, Emma was fired because managerial forms told us in the earlier forms of neoliberal agendas around managerialism that we know the one way to teach, the one curriculum, and for working class and poor children, black and white, illegally in this school, since Boston was a segregated school system at the time, that the children had to be taught to be docile, not have thoughts of their own. Well, yes, she was fired. I'll come back to Emma's words later. She is the founder of the first teachers' union in the United States. And she moved from being teacher union president to being superintendent of schools of a large city near Boston. And midnight plus 1 minute, the first thing she did was to remove this form of evaluating teachers. We have come a long way, and dominant groups have an epistemological project of the loss of collective memory. So part of our task, in many ways, as I go through the first half of this analysis of what is going on, can we answer this very difficult question, is to remember that we have answered it already through the labor of people at universities, in communities, in women's groups, in teachers, and by the feet of students who walk on our campuses and say, I will not tolerate this. I should end there, but I won't. I will not free you yet. But since this is Turkey, there is an examination at the end, so no one may leave until you have passed. Okay, all right. Okay, So here is the question. It's a difficult one. I want to see if we can solve it. First, how do we think about this question? Seems to me, obviously, we need to think much more powerfully about education's role in society and about whether it can participate in changing society's inequalities. The first step is to understand that education always has been and is now and will be in the future political. There is no place beyond that. That's not all it is, but the choice of knowledge is an ethical and political act, as an example. In Turkey and in China and in my own nation of the United States, if I know where you live in a city, I know what your parents do for paid and unpaid work, I can predict within one standard deviation how well you would do on any national exam that is given. I do not like those data, but it's true. It is political, it is economic, it's also cultural, and it's about not doing missionary work, but about being respectful of the complexities of this. It is not easy. And because of that, we must be guided by two key concepts. One is called relational analysis, the other is called repositioning. Relational analysis simply says one clear thing, that institutions can only be fully understood by their connections to relations of dominance and subordination and struggles against those relations in the larger society, whether we like it or not. I want to give one concrete example of that, and it has to do with this typed thing that's on a flash drive. When I was doing the work of forming this lecture and typing it into my computer, I walked into my building, the teacher education building at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I walked up the stairs. I turned the light on in my office. I turned on the computer went on, and I began to type. That is not actually what happened. All of that did go on. Michael Apple walked up the stairs. I opened the door to my office. I turned on the light. I turned on the computer. Miraculously, it came on, and I began to type. In my city, we burn coal to produce electricity. And my act of trying to teach myself and others, whether I like it or not, I am now connected to the 250 miners in the area of the Midwest of the United States who must die or be badly injured every year for me to make this presentation. It is not my choice, but it is real. So we must understand that even progressive pedagogic acts are related to the larger society. The other is repositioning. Whether I like it or not, I have been born as a white, straight male, and even though I grew up very, very poor, and in fact am the first person in my family to finish secondary school, even with that, I have certain privileges. And because of that, I must see as much as I can through different glasses, what it is like to be a woman in an increasingly patriarchal society again, in Turkey and my own nation, with Donald Trump as a possible president. What you are seeing is Michael now taking a poison pill so I don't have to go back to the United States. But then I'm in Turkey, so I won't take the poison pill. I'm so depressed. No, okay. Not really. Okay. So, but again, I must look at the world through eyes of what it is like to be Kurdish. What it is like to be a Syrian, one of the 3 million Syrian refugees fleeing their lives who are now in this great nation. What does that mean to look at education through those eyes? Okay? So I'm asking then for simple things. Now we are facing, in many ways, the answer that is already present. There are groups who are saying we've already answered this question. And in fact, the question that I raised at the outset is the wrong question to ask. The right has already noted very, very carefully and very thoroughly that education can participate in changing society in extremely powerful ways. After all, it has attempted to cut budgets of many institutions. In my own nation, at my university, our budget has been cut by $250 million in the last 4 years. Fees that were for students here at this great university that helped fund initial and powerful programs have now been forced the university into very serious budget deliberations. The pyramid in many nations has gotten steeper as education becomes something that you get and can no longer get a job. So it's clear now that education is part of an ideological project often in transforming many, many parts of society. And I want us to think about this as a hegemonic umbrella. 4 groups of people who have come together. And it's important that we pay attention to this because in Turkey, as in the United States and England and Germany and France, the enemy is seen as neoliberalism. It is not that simple. And it is perfectly possible for us to win battles against neoliberalism and still lose in every school in my nation and your own. So I want to talk a bit about a more complicated alliance. The first group is neoliberalism. It's clear what they have. It's a corporate agenda. Private is necessarily good. Public is necessarily bad. The more money I can put into religious schools as part of an Islamization project, the better it will be. Now, before I go further on that, let me remind you I work with religious activists throughout the world. So do not misinterpret my points about religion. We must be deeply respectful about the motives and values that people hold. And one of the problems with my nation has been the marginalization of progressive religious groups. So when I am in Brazil working with impoverished groups and they say to me, Jesus was the first socialist, I am not asking about the religious forms. I'm saying, what is your action? And when people quote the Quran in my nation and say, look at the way it treats capital, I want to listen very, very carefully. But remember, I am a guest here, and its meaning in the United States may not be the meaning here, to say the least. And I'm aware of that. Okay? So neoliberalism, private is good, public is bad. It also believes in supposedly a weak state, shrink the budget for many public institutions, make teachers constantly give evidence that they are doing the right thing, changing people's identities from more collective to more sort of what might be called possessive individualism. All of that is going on. So in my own nation, for teachers to get a raise, the only way they can get a raise is if their students score higher on the achievement tests. So it's an epistemological war. What counts as evidence? Evidence is test scores. To do a world-class education means that we must do things on PISA. Right? So this is the neoliberal agenda. It is the fiction of the weak state. Because in my own nation, 1 out of every 4 African-American young men is now in prison. It is a weak state for some things and quite a strong state for other things. So we are perfectly willing to give youth free housing, free hospitals, free health care, and a little bit of literacy practices, provided they are willing to go to jail. Okay? I mean this quite seriously, so the data are robust. So this fiction of neoliberalism being the weak state becomes important, but it is an attack on teachers' rationality. It's a technicist vision, and if you read any Habermas, you know what this means, conceptually as well as politically. But this vision of the weak state is sutured together with another group that is very present here and present in most nations of the world that we want to call neoconservatism. Neoconservatism doesn't look forward to a more efficient, more corporate-agendaed society. It looks backward to building something that they believe is already there, the restoration of a common culture. So the more we can have elite knowledge at its rightful place in the curriculum in schools, and the more we can hold teachers' feet to the fire of evaluation to ensure that they teach it, the more effective and efficient our schools will be. Let me be honest about this. In no nation of the world has there historically been a common culture. As Bourdieu reminds us, that is an act of symbolic violence. Turkey has a multiplicity of linguistic forms. It is formed out of the labors and cultures of many people to form one of the most brilliant cultures in the world, but it is in process. Culture is a verb, not a noun. And what is common is that we disagree. And we must find democratic ways in which we find that agreement. So common culture then is a process of deliberative agency in which people constantly deliberate not on what was there supposedly for everyone, because what was there for everyone is not there for everyone. Let me remind you something you do not need reminding. Turkey is being transformed by real people coming across its borders. Europe wants you to do everything for them. It will export its crisis onto Turkey constantly for a whole array of quite distressing reasons. But that means that Turkey is in formation. It's an experiment now, in the same way that all nations are experiments. And neoconservatives are part of an epistemological war again of looking backwards. And let me remind you that any culture that is static cannot be for everyone. There are diasporic populations throughout the world, and I'm not saying this is good or bad, though I think it's good. And the United States, for instance, has the highest rate of immigration in the last 100 years. My own city, the city of Paterson, New Jersey, where I was born, is now the second largest Arabic-speaking city in the United States. It had no Arabic-speaking citizens there when I was a child. What is common? It's in motion. All right? So, there is a third group. Neoconservatism then wants a strong state to impose the common through ministries of education. It is a de-skilling and deprofessionalizing of teachers. Someone outside of the reality will make the decision. The third group, which certainly is increasingly powerful in my own nation and here, is what I want to call authoritarian populists. These are people who believe that the people must decide, but there are good people and not so good people. And the good people are those who believe exactly what they do, and anyone else is the other. It is the gated mental community. So the fastest growing educational reform in the United States right now is not marketization. It is homeschooling. Often by conservative Christians, often now in Israel, conservative Jews, in Hindutva movements in India by conservative Hindus, saying that the other who does not believe in our religious forms, in fact, is the other, is a form of pollution. We must keep our children away from them. So again, we are seeing a rapid rise of this, and this is complicated because there are elements of good sense in this. Many ministries of education throughout the world do not listen carefully to pleas from below. So these are often community mobilizations, but it is damaging since the assumption is, again, that dominant groups now can claim the logic of being the new oppressed. This is it. I must now tell you something honestly. That was Professor Rima Apple, who has reminded me what my doctor has said. As some of you know, I have been hospitalized a bit in the last 4 months, and I have quite bad arthritis. And my doctors have told me, if you stand for more than half an hour, you will wind up in the hospital again. So I must sit now. You may now go to sleep. I will sit. Thank you, Rima. Yes, I know. Okay, no. Okay. I apologize for that. The aging male body is not a joy, okay? Unlike the aging female body, which has no ailments whatsoever. Okay, all right. So I can't, excuse me, I must look at my notes now. Okay, so authoritarian populism then becomes extraordinarily powerful. Okay? And in this nation, increasingly, it becomes official. And certainly in many other nations as well. Now, this is interesting because, again, there are elements of good sense here. And that's the point. These three are what we can appropriately call conservative movements. But we are facing a new hegemonic bloc, as Gramsci would call it, that includes in education groups of people who will not vote for conservative parties. This is a particular fraction of the professional and managerial new middle class who believe one simple thing. If it moves in classrooms, measure it. And if it hasn't moved yet, measure it anyway in case it moves tomorrow. So these are people with a particular kind of cultural capital of accountability, cost-cutting, efficiency, measurement, testing, and they have occupied positions within ministries of education throughout the world. They will vote progressive. In the United States, these are often Obama supporters. But it is that class fraction often that is in charge of a good deal of educational policy and practice. So it is perfectly possible for us to win against people who are officially neoliberals, to win against those people who wish to impose a false sense of the common, to withstand some of the authoritarian forms of religious impulses, while still being respectful, I would hope, and still lose in schools. Am I clear about that? It's very important. So when I go into schools often, and teachers tell me, I can't teach what you say is good, because it's not on the examination. So I was a few months ago in Korea, where teachers are struggling against the history of authoritarian regimes, and they want to teach much more democratic and robust critical educational forms of the real history of militarization there, very similar to the military coups in Turkey. And the students will sit there and you can see the hands go up. And they will ask one question. Teacher, is this on the examination? And the teacher will say no, and the heads go on the desk. Okay? I want to be realistic about this because many of the discussions are so abstract we forget that these abstractions are meant to clarify the realities that we face. And good theory comes epistemologically from its engagement with its object. Okay? So it's an epistemological commitment, not simply a political one. All right? Okay. So all of these are showing already how schools can participate in changing society. So what can we learn from these groups of people? The right has shown us powerfully, again, I think the only true Gramscians left are the right, that this is what might be called a war of position, not a war of maneuver. You'll forgive the masculinist metaphors about war, but Gramsci says, think of the conflicts over culture as involving two kinds of battles. One would be like this. The rector is over here, he's well respected, but he has people with guns over here. And I'm over here, I don't respect that. I'm on the opposing side, I have a group of people with guns, and both of us yell charge. Whoever is left standing wins. It looks like World War I. It's Gallipoli. Whoever is left standing wins. And the argument that Gramsci makes, which is absolutely brilliant and correct, is the right understands what is called a war of position. Everything counts. Curriculum, teaching, healthcare, community involvement, government policy, the economy, religion. Everything counts, and the task is to work simultaneously at each level, but the task is to organize it so they are all working towards the same agenda. So the left has been extremely important and powerful about this, that it's a war of maneuver. Also, the right is telling us about the significance of consciousness and the struggle over common sense. A good example is the word democracy. Under neoliberalism, democracy is no longer collective. So if we were to have a conversation in Turkey about a democratic school or in the United States, we'd say the teacher is treated as a professional with a brain, as are academics, that the students should be in some ways interested in it, that it should reflect the best of the diversity in this nation. So it is what we might call in philosophy thick understandings of democracy. It's a fully participatory process. And the task of neoliberalism is to change that word, to keep the word and pour in different meanings. So democracy now is consumption practices. So in my own nation, school choice with the government funding religious schools, homeschooling, etc. So now democracy is simply following the laws of the market. It's Adam Smith without ever having read Adam Smith. In Wealth of Nations, I believe it's page 313 in the English edition, Adam Smith says the following: for every one rich person, there must be 500 poor ones. He got his mathematics wrong. It's probably about 500,000 poor ones. But it's a brilliant understanding by the father of academic capitalism about what is going on. So the task, again, is a creative pedagogic project to change our understanding of what's important. Keeping the words in circulation, changing their meanings, and since it is social mobilizations and movements that change education, demobilizing people by giving people new identities as consumers where social justice will take care of itself. That is never the case. It also reminds us that education is a crucial site of struggle. You'll forgive the word struggle, but it is. Anyone in these institutions knows that the right is increasingly powerful. And let me remind all of you that if education wasn't important, why is the right so powerfully trying to change it? There must have been victories. So they understand stuff that I think that some of the left does not understand. It's all the economy all the time. Well, let me remind you that people work in schools. That is the economy. So is healthcare, so is factories, so is mines, and so is unpaid labor of women in the home. All right? Rima, I'm going to stand for a little while. Thank you so much. Okay. So I argue against people being seen as puppets, but it's clear that I'm now a puppet. Not of Rima, but of my doctors. Okay. Okay. So there is an ambulance parked outside, but it's filled with raka. So there's a key word here. So can education change society? I've said that the right is very, very effective in changing the meaning of the word of using education. It's already answered the question. But what do we mean by society? It's a useless word. Society is a place marker for more complex understandings. To call it society ignores the important gains that have been made brilliantly in the School of Education of this university, brilliantly, by some of the best research in the world, that reminds me that Turkey is a very complicated place. And to talk about education's relationship to society means we have to be much more sophisticated than simply saying it's this big thing, since society is a lot of big things. So it ignores, it makes us forget what we've learned. It makes us forget not only about the economy, but that political and cultural spheres are important, that the state counts and who occupies the state counts, that there's multiple relations of power, class, gender, race, and ability, as an example. Society is an empty set. Now let's get real and talk about who's controlling it and what. And words, unfortunately, like society, can lead us to cynicism and a lack of action. So as an educator, what can I do? It's so big, it's impossible to change. That is simply an excuse for non-action whatsoever. Let me remind you that non-action is action. Since, as an example, if there had been more people voting in this nation and my own, we might not be facing what we are facing now. So, that means we have to ask, what do schools do? So a reminder, schools are already part of society. This thing where we say you can't change education unless you change things outside of education, especially for some aspects of the left. Until you change the economy, you can do nothing in schools. That's simply wrong. And in part, even though the person might think that they are being Marxist, that has never been Marx's position, and it ain't Marxist in one moment. Even if you believe in economic reductionisms, second international Marxisms, which are often quite insightful about many things, we have to ask, what is the economy? The economy is made up of the social relations and technical relations of labor, paid and unpaid, where people work. Let me again remind you, teachers work in schools, Women who cook the food for the children work in schools. Security guards work in schools. Building cleaners who are underpaid work in schools. That is the economy. So no matter what one's position is on the ideological moments behind this, that is the economy. Working in schools is struggling in the economy. But schools are also spaces where they're being turned into spaces of profit. So the fastest growing higher education models in the United States are now for-profit institutions that suck up government dollars and give credentials that are worthless. And many people who graduate from these supposed universities that are making huge amounts of profit, the students are having $100,000 to $200,000 debt, they lose their houses, etc. I quote from someone who's a hedge fund manager of the largest hedge fund in the United States, education is the next health care. We can turn a huge profit on it. I get very nervous about statements like that, as you might imagine. But schools are also places that determine what is official knowledge and what not. Whose memory is stored? Whose vision of what counts as common is there? As an example, in the United States, there is recent archaeological evidence and documented evidence that enslaved people who were stolen from Africa, 1/3 of them were literate in Arabic and were Muslim. That means the people who did the original labor in the United States were Muslim. That's very interesting. That story is not told. Instead, we claim we are a nation built from Christianity, yet the people who did the labor, not paid, often dead, were Muslim. That's important to know, yet we don't. Schools also are sites of identity creation. So that is, people learn how to be in public. So if I go on very, very long, some of you will still look ahead, or you will have your phones buried under here, checking your email, doing Facebook, but it is impolite to do that publicly. Where did we learn to do that? Well, I learned it in school. I was very good at hiding my true intent. If the lecture was horrible, I was reading science fiction. Okay? Now we don't read science fiction, but I tell you, I tried to have a conversation with my grandchild, and saying, turn the Facebook off is an impossibility. So, but schools are also not just identity creators of who is smart and who is not, but they're sites of social movement creation. People learn tactics in their struggles over schools. Students learn what is possible and what's not. You can't understand the liberation movements of so many nations unless you think about how much people care about their children and that they will refuse to have their children simply become docile workers. They want jobs, but they also want people who are cherished and who think for themselves. So schools are sites of creation of mobilizations. They're also sites of developing learning and learning tactics. And they're also schools as sites of social experimentation in many nations. So what are we to do about this? I'm now going to go more rapidly into the second half of this. What should we do given this? If schools are not alien, are not places that we can ignore, we cannot excuse non-action, that cynicism is not useful, what should we do? I want to just list 9 tasks of people like ourselves. And I say like ourselves for one specific reason. Many, many people in social policy, which is part of my agenda, and in critical education are very good at telling teachers what to do while ignoring what they have to do. So we might say these are the principles for our own work, those of us who call ourselves educators. Whether we are physicists, or sociologists, or art historians, or musicians, what should we be doing, and who is the we? First, it seems to me, anyone who takes on the term of being a critical education must tell the truth. To quote either the Quran as a holy book, or the Christian Bible, or the Jewish Torah, we must bear witness to negativity. We must tell the truth about what is happening in this society. as the gap between the rich and the poor grows throughout the world by 7% a year beyond the inflation rate. We must tell the truth. Because of that, we must be very, very cautious of postmodern theory when it's taken too aggressively, that the world is made up of discourses, that there is no truth whatsoever, there are truth effects. This is a disaster if taken too far. Poverty is not a discourse. The murder of children by ISIS is not a discourse. The refusal to allow women to work outside the home is not a discourse. It is a material reality. And we do damage to that reality by making it into one story. Yes, we want narratives and stories, but the world is not only stories. The world is real and material and joyous and painful. So let us remember our responsibility in saying what is going on, but that also means defending the good things that are going on as well. As I mentioned before, the right would not be so angry at universities like METU, saying, this place might be a little too political, if there weren't democratic forms that had been built. So we need to defend what is here as well as change. Sometimes the discourse of change is dangerous. It says whatever you've got is bad. Well, we are not puppets either. We have won major things about the nature of higher education. But doing this can create cynicism. If all we do is say, here, look how bad that is. Look, oh, that's even worse. That's horrible. That is a logic of inaction. So we must look for contradictions. We must look for spaces where possibilities lie. The world is contradictory, and every time neoliberalism wins something, it opens a space for other action. I'll give one example of this. Neoliberalism, with its vision of the possessive individual, says that one must change one's identity. One must think of oneself as a profit-maximizing individual. So community is less important unless it can be for profit. So in my own nation, you can know the history of Wisconsin by going to a place that's like a Disney World of farm communities and learn what it was like when people from Turkey came as farmers to the state of Wisconsin. You can go to a Turkish farm at $35 to see fake Turks doing fake farming. But the tradition is kept alive, okay? So it's either commodified or destroyed. But that space is there because people need sociality. We like to argue. We like to talk with each other. We do not wish to be isolated. That philosophical anthropology is what underpins so much of the humanities. We must communicate with each other. And because of that, it means that there will always be spaces for action. Those can be filled with mosques and churches. They can be filled with unions. They can be filled with women's groups. And the right is colonizing that space. We must rebuild those communities. And when the government attacks teachers' unions, it is attacking the very notion of community, not just the teachers themselves. But these spaces are being filled right now. And a third task, and this requires different definitions of what counts as research at our universities, is acting as critical secretaries of critically democratic education. People, again, are doing things in every school system in the world. Teachers, administrators, community actors, people working together to say, this will not go on here. And the best definition of teaching I have ever heard is by a friend of mine who lives next door. When I asked him, so Gregory, how was your day? He was a secondary history teacher. And he said, once more, I didn't have time to urinate. It is the best definition of teaching I've ever heard in my life. It can be applied to administrators, I assure you, as well. And what that says is that they do not have time to tell their stories of success. Those memories are lost, and not just memories, the realities of this are being lost. And part of the task of critical work at universities is to keep those memories alive so that people think it is possible to do counter-hegemonic work, to do more democratic work. And that means that the epistemological forms at universities also need to change and become more flexible. So in education, we are taught that you must do numbers. I want to do narratives as well. I want thick descriptions of people giving their lives to making education better. And those small steps are the beginnings of what Raymond Williams, in his brilliant book, The Long Revolution, calls the long revolution. It must start somewhere. And it starts with people. So we must again engage in epistemological conflict. While I'm opposed to seeing the world as stories, it is important that those stories of success be told. And that should be granted the same high status as someone that has done medical model research. Right? Now that means also we need to keep traditions that are threatened alive. There is an epistemological attack by neoliberals and neoconservatives on what counts as rationality. Rationality is numbers, but it isn't. It is care. It is solidarity. It is being with others. And because of that, we need to keep the critical traditions alive, and we also need to keep them alive critically. Class is powerful. It does not explain all. The economy is powerful. It is not the only motor in this society. Gender is crucial. Religious forms work off of patriarchal relations often, and empires depend on race. And the history of this great nation shows from its colonizing history, not it as a colonizer, but the ways in which other nations see Turkey as a pawn in other nations' debates. So we need to understand the ways in which this works. We need to keep these traditions alive and criticize them at the same time. At the same time, we need to give these knowledge to other movements. We should not commit intellectual suicide. There is a reason we are here. So false modesty, we must always be populist, we have nothing to teach, is exactly the wrong position to take. We are here, every one of us, because of the sacrifices of generations of known and unknown people who have built this institution, who have kept it alive, or who have given us the material and emotional support so that we can be here. And you'll forgive me if I turn now to a very personal story that I think brings this home. Whether I like it or not, I'm the author of some famous books. Okay? That's nice. And in my family, that is crucial. I come from a family of printers. My grandfather was a printer. My father was a printer, and I worked my way through night school at a small teacher's college for my undergraduate degree, being a printer, printing the books that I now write. And I was a teacher. I still am, but I was in schools. And unlike other people, or probably like most people, after a book had just won an award and I got another honorary degree, I went to see my father, who never finished secondary school on time, and he was a printer, and he's got a little dementia, and he's in this assisted living home because he refuses to move out to live with us. I'm independent. And as you walk into this little studio apartment, there's a shrine to Rima and Michael Apple, a shrine of books with pictures of Rima and me. It literally looks like a holy setting. And I come in and I say to Harry Apple, I say, Harry, we need to talk. And he knows that when I call him by his first name, it's serious. It's not Dad, it's Harry, we need to talk. And I'm saying, look, when I was teaching in the slums, I knew that I was making an impact. When I taught a child to read, I could see it was Michael teaching Jose how to read. So I've written all these books. I've got hundreds of doctoral students who've finished with me. Is it worth it? Was it a mistake? I don't know whether it's having an impact. Is it just it's good for my ego? And he looks at me and puts his face within 1 inch. And I'm breathing the heat coming out of his mouth. And he looks at me and says, "Michael!" in exactly that yell. I know I'm about to be sent to my room for a timeout. And he says, I won't say the F word that he said. And my father never swore. He was quite militant. And when he got arrested, he first put on a tie, because the working class must look respectable. Interesting. And he yells again, "Michael, what the did you just say? That is the most disrespectful thing you have ever said in your life. Our entire family sacrificed for you to be who you are. You are what we wanted to be ourselves. We were denied all these things. Why are you saying that our lives are worthless? That is the most disrespectful thing you have ever said, damn it." And he turns around. And he then turns back to Michael and says the following: "You must pay us back by bringing what you learned back to us. That's your task. You are humiliating us if you don't. We sacrificed for you." Those are the smartest words I have ever heard in my life. So part of the task is, again, to give back to the community what it has already paid for. This is a public institution. It is paid for out of the surplus labor of paid and unpaid labor. Every bit of knowledge created here has been paid for by real people. We must never doubt that whatever we do is important. The task is to give it back. I'm sorry, I get emotional about that story, okay? So, but how do we give it back? Well, we must learn to speak and write in different levels, in different registers. That is, we shouldn't be talking to people as if Foucault everyone read. I like Bourdieu. I think Althusser is very, very much worth reading. I think Gramsci was brilliant. I think feminist theory is brilliant. I think a theory of thermodynamics as it is now being iterated and used, and the work, for instance, that's very complicated about in an earthquake zone, how do I engineer it so people don't die? I think advanced mathematics is crucial. How do I convince other people who don't read these formulas? What is my role as a public intellectual to generate the support that must go on with that? So we have to learn in many ways not to assume that everyone has a dictionary with them that says, here is what Foucault said. There's a bit of arrogance in that, it seems to me. We also must never stand on the balcony. The epistemological forms I'm arguing for say the following. It's critical, what's called critical pragmatism. It's John Dewey that's politicized, for those of you in education. And it says this: the best theory and the best knowledge is done in relationship to its object. And for those of us in education, that object is literacy practices, schools, cultural struggles, teacher education, the entire assemblage of things that go on in communities, schools, and families. So we must not stand on the balcony. We must join in these movements, if I'm correct, as we know we are historically, that it is social mobilizations and movements that change education. Educators join them, they don't lead them. Ministries of education change not because we have good ideas, though those good ideas are important. They also change because they have power by groups who say no more or do this. So we must then build and join movements. And I remember one of my favorite books by Bakhtin called Rabelais and His World. I am less interested in Rabelais. I'm more interested in Bakhtin's take, his analysis of Carnival in Europe. And Carnival occurs at a time when Lent was over, and it's when oppressed people could speak back to the kings and queens. They could be transgressive, and they would build giant balloons made out of animal skins and parade through the streets with music and drama, and they would squeeze the balloon of the queen who had male genitalia sewn onto her body. The balloon, not the real queen. Right? And in doing so, it would make rude bathroom-like noises. And Carnival occurs at a particular time when 1 month a year people could talk back with no danger, supposedly. And the emerging new petty bourgeoisie loves Carnival as a spectacle. It builds an architectural form called the balcony, out over Carnival. Here, look at those transgressive forms, look at those movements, look at those mobilizations. How impressive. Smell the smells, listen to the music. Isn't that marvelous? I'm so glad I'm not down there. So the balcony is not the place if we are to be critical. Now, it seems to me that we can say these words as forms of rhetorical artifice, or we can do something else, though the words are important. These should be reflected in our teaching commitments as well. Saying this is not simply to be lectured, though I'm doing it here today. It's also about how do we embody it. To be a critical educator is to take the task of education as not training. While it has technical elements, it is not only technicist, though there are great skills that need to be learned to be a teacher. And that means we have to partly at least try, with all the tension and difficulties of this, of acting as a mentor and model for one's students. How can one do the best research in the world, as the School of Education does here, and at the same time model the commitment that goes with it in times of neoliberal agendas? We will never be perfect in this, but our students deserve to see that we try. That requires taking risks, and I am not in the job of making people feel guilty. That's an unproductive emotion unless we can do something about it. The task in many ways is to say, look, I will try to. Some of us will be arrested. As someone who was arrested in Korea for saying something like this, where's the good red wine that goes with my sitting down? No, okay. Okay, so that's another reason for moving to Turkey. I'm almost done, I promise. That is a promise. Okay? So in some ways, I'm not asking. So my arrest in Korea was scary, very, very frightening, but sometimes one must act. So what I'm asking is, I'll let you decide. Okay? So, then finally, we must expand the spaces for those who are not part of this conversation now. There are people in this audience, there are people who are not here. There are students wanting to go to universities throughout this nation who can't. In my own nation, there are students going into debt that they can never repay because they had parents like Michael Apple's, who said, we will sacrifice no matter what to have the dream for our children. That is a powerful dream. They are not here. What is our responsibility? There are women who cannot participate because of religious forms. They are not here. There are Kurds who are not here, who cannot participate. I won't go on because the list is too long and painful. We have a responsibility. And that means I cannot tell you what to do, but I know what I would say to my administration and to my colleagues. There are people who want to be teachers who cannot do it, but who bring about a wealth of care and solidarity and love that must be in our schools. We have a responsibility to make certain that they can. Okay. The last thing, and I'm just going to read this because this is the end, and it deserves to be read. But I need to tell you that this speech has been brought to you by Coca-Cola as a good neoliberal, and by McDonald's. Those of you who know me and some of my work, a relatively well-known essay called, Eating Cheap French Fries. I boycott McDonald's and other things. They do not allow unions in the United States. That's another lecture, okay? And besides, they're bad for your heart, okay? And I support all cardiologists throughout the world. So let me just read this, okay? We must never be romantic. I have to stand, my glasses are in the way. Am I blocking you? I hope so. No, okay. We must never be romantic, but hope is a powerful resource. We should think of ourselves as optimists with no illusions whatsoever. Think of the gains that have been made over the years and the sacrifices that they have required. We owe it to the children of Turkey, to the teachers and community activists who came before us, to the workers who were exploited, to those who have died and been imprisoned in the long and continuing struggle for justice and for a true democracy. We owe it to all of them and to so many more people to continue the struggle for an education that is critically democratic. That is our task. Thank you. It might have been clear to them. It wasn't clear to me.
Sorry. It's not a question, but Mr. Apple, I want to make a definition of motherhood. You make a definition of teacher. I want to make a definition of motherhood. Being a mother is being happy when someone parts near you. This is my definition of motherhood.
That's a beautiful comment, actually. For those of you who don't know, the issue of motherhood is actually crucial in all of this. When I ended by saying care, love, and solidarity, it was meant actually almost as a reflection on this. That is, it is a relationship that is not anonymous. It cannot be anonymous. It is a relationship when someone does this and you smile. It is your child. Now, for those of you who don't know, sometimes I'm the other Professor Apple when Rima is speaking. Rima has done a book on the history of motherhood. That's one of her areas. And one of the things that she has pointed to is how, in many ways, mothers are taught almost to ignore this, to redefine the nature of love through medical interventions, through the advice of doctors, to be subjected to advertising telling you you are bad all the time. So if you want something to sort of trace out the history of this, one of Rima's books is called Perfect Motherhood, which is a reflection on exactly these kinds of things, of how, in many ways, women lose this sensibility. And by the way, it's not just motherhood, it should be fatherhood as well. Since it's not a mother's problem, it's often a father's problem, okay? He says from years of experience, and sometimes, as I am learning, a grandfather's problem as well. But thank you very much for a lovely comment. Right?
Hello.
I'm sorry, this light is killing me. I apologize, I'll have to stand over here.
It's okay. Thank you very much for this. Brilliant ideas and
especially when you describe today as violence, symbolic violence. I particularly liked it. And can you elaborate more on new managerialism, part of the talk?
Yeah, certainly.
Because it was quite clear, at least to me, neoliberalism, neoconservatism. We even have one professor at the Ankara University calling theoliberalism with theology.
Yes.
And authoritarian
That's an accurate
populism.
description, actually.
I got this. But new managerialism.
Okay.
Can you do that? Thank you.
If this was a seminar in sociology, here's what I would say. I am arguing against two-class models. I am arguing within neo-Marxist traditions and in multiple critical traditions that we have to have better theories of the state and which class fractions take their cultural capital, it's sort of a Bourdieuian analysis, and enable that to gain mobility within the state apparatus. So I'm arguing there's a relatively autonomous fraction of the new middle class that works in the state, and they have often gone to METU, Boğaziçi, many, many other institutions that are very high quality, and they've gotten their degrees in public policy, in tests and measurement, in administration. And I want to be careful because there are democratic models of administration that we really need to take seriously. Because if we don't do it, someone else will. Okay? So do not see this as we don't need administration. That is vulgar populism. Okay? So I'm arguing that there is a relatively autonomous class fraction that we cannot know them, we cannot predict by their voting patterns how they will act. They are acting in their own interest and thinking that they are helping. So these are the people in many ways who say that PISA scores are absolutely central to quality education, or who, like Obama and his Minister of War on Education, who said the following: a good teacher is one who must be held accountable to performance measures, and those performance measures must be objective, and objective means numbers. So we must put in place what is called performance pay for teachers, and in the United States, in 42 states, there are now performance measures for teachers. Nationally, you cannot get any federal money for a school system unless you agree to have performance testing for teachers. Now that is what Stuart Hall calls recontextualization. So you take an idea, accountability, which I think is actually a very important idea. So in English, the word accountability has two meanings. Accountability would be like an accountant saying, what's your numbers? But also if I was with a teacher and say, can you give me an account of what happened in your classroom today? That means tell me a story. Okay? So the attempt by this class fraction is to reduce accountability to one limited sense of the word account. Even though in the English language it still carries the memory of the multiple meanings of it. Give me an account, which is a narrative, a history. Okay? So this is a group that has engaged in what Bourdieu calls conversion strategies. So they've taken the word accountability, which by the way doesn't come in the history of education in many nations from the right. It comes from poor people saying, I don't trust what's going on in schools. I want you to tell me why you're doing this, and I want to see what you're doing. So when I work with community mobilizing groups within poor communities of color, as we call them in the United States, they don't want teachers to go away from the textbook, oddly enough, even though the textbook might be quite sexist and racist. But they know they want the teacher to teach what they can read, meaning what the parents know will be taught. Because right now they don't trust white teachers to teach black kids right now. That may be wrong. It's very stereotypical about white teachers, and it's very stereotypical about black kids. But this group then takes that, a phrase that could mean many things, so it decontextualizes it. It pulls it, it's called disarticulation, and then rearticulates it to another agenda. Strong state control, performance, anything in the public sector must always give evidence that you're acting correctly. Okay? So I'm making an argument also in class terms, that they're relatively autonomous class fractions. So I'm trying to change some of what I called vulgar Marxists, that is Second International Marxism. That is, if you want to talk about class, talk about modern capitalism. Even though in many nations we are moving towards satanic mills again. So I'm not dismissing economism. It's real. But I do want us to not to assume that those classes forming policies in the state I don't want us to assume that they're simply puppets of capital. There's relative autonomy. That's Althusser, by the way. Okay? There's a question over here.
Thank you. Thanks for this brilliant talk. I was very interested in your point about the impact of postmodernism in education. Your point about telling the truth. Can you elaborate more on that? How has postmodern fashion affected education in our societies? Thank you.
This is complicated, okay? First of all, I have 1.5 legs that are within Gramscian and sort of neo-Marxist stuff. But I've got another half leg, which says that's not sufficient. So I have been strongly influenced by some postmodern forms and by post-structural forms. I think issues of identity are crucial. I want to be very, very cautious about power-knowledge relations. And I want to remind myself constantly about the way in which discourses circulate to create identities. Okay? And I think sometimes that surface counts, not just depth. Okay? So one of the postmodern, so let's take postmodern architecture, okay? Which we will take these hybrid forms and we will say we'll keep the front of the building as this architectural treasure, and the rest is this horrific building with 87 elevators that you can't open the windows in, but the electricity has gone off. You'll forgive me for being a little too cute about that. So I want to take those elements that are very insightful from postmodern forms, but I am very, very worried about the relativism that goes with it. I think it's epistemologically suspect. Now, I have a master's degree in analytic philosophy, and you'll forgive me for saying this. If you're going to tell me that truth is relative, I have no reason to accept what you just said. There's no status to what you're claiming. No matter what Derrida says, and others, I think we've got this love of anything that's French. Okay? But it's often brilliantly insightful. So I am not in a church, so I'm not worried about heresy. Okay? So I think that the left has to grow up, but it also has to remember where it came from. But I am surrounded by people who are relativists, who think that as long as we can deconstruct power knowledge, the world will be a better place. Well, I want us to deconstruct, but I also want to construct. Okay? And I also want us to remember, let's take Foucault, who I think is one of the most brilliant thinkers of the 18th century. No, that's too cute. I mean, I've been influenced by this. Very smart, really smart stuff. But I want to be very cautious in what I say here. The task of educators who want to do theory is not to be amateur philosophers. If you want to do Foucault or Derrida, etc., some of the best work in using it is in education. And one of the best people in using it happens to be a new faculty member here. Okay? But in many, many places, it becomes a way of non-action. And it's amateur Foucault, amateur Derrida, amateur Zizek, who at least he tries to be clear, though he fails. But there is this sense that worries me of sort of, it's almost like slumming. We can get by with not the most sophisticated forms of it. So again, let me take Foucault. He died as an ACT-UP activist. He wasn't just about deconstruction. He died of AIDS. Nobody has to die of AIDS in this entire world. No one. He put his life on the line in San Francisco, led marches, and if you read his interviews, he warns people about the dangers of deconstruction. Brilliantly so. So I want us, if we're going to do postmodernism, we must look very carefully at what it is arguing against, because it is intertextual. It's responding to aggressive forms of Stalinism within the French Communist Party. It's responding in many ways to Althusser. First of all, remember I said that education occurs not just in buildings that we call schools. That one of the ways the right has changed our understanding of education. So in Wisconsin, our governor has said education should, why are we funding the humanities? It's useless. Or in Japan, where Prime Minister Abe has said, we're going to close all the departments of humanities, and is about to do it. Right? It's not a nice thing. They have colonized the spaces of other kinds of education, the media in particular. So it seems to me it can't just be done by saying, well, here's what you would do with teachers. We have to understand that in order for this to go on, there's a cultural struggle that has to go on, first about giving teachers the respect that they deserved, so that they have some autonomy. And the sphere of autonomy is being reduced massively in almost every nation I can think of. Okay? So the right colonizes the space of the media brilliantly. They have a coherent media project. So as an example, when a rightist document comes out from a Ministry of Education or a conservative think tank that says the problem is teacher education, let's close schools of education, we can do it in 6 weeks for Teach for America, or now Teach for China, or Teach for Chile, Teach for Brazil, Teach for Argentina, right? It's really frightening. But it's working. Those documents come out with bad data, almost no research, but with a form that makes it look like they're sophisticated. But if you look at the numbers in the formula, basically, you'll forgive me, they're lying. When I was a graduate student at Columbia, we had to take 3 years of advanced stat. I was unhappy taking the last year. It was hard work. But I now know how to read this stuff and say, you can't do that with that, right? So we need to do what the right has done. What they do is they send it out. They have a critical journalist of the right, rewrite that report, and it goes out to every newspaper, every television station in the country. So what you hear is teacher education is horrible, it's low level, why should we fund it? And teachers are stupid in the first place. And the last place. It makes me want to be an American. Get a gun. Okay? That was not nice. But it's true. That's the US response. Right? So, what we have started to try and deal with this is what's called the Critical Media Project. So as soon as a right-wing document comes out, that says teachers are uncreative, not very talented, they're the dumbest students at the university, which, by the way, is not true at most universities. Okay? We then, if it's in things like voucher plans or neoliberal plans, or for me, I also do work in curriculum. It goes to me, if it's a large document, I have a week to write a response. If it's what we call an op-ed piece, in the major newspaper, 3 or 4 pages, I have 1 day. drop everything. I don't care how important my research is supposed to be. My editor is saying, where's the book? You make a commitment that says, now I have one day to craft something that's popular, and I send it to a critical journalist who's working with us in this project, and he takes my somewhat academic voice and makes it popular, and then it goes out. Now the rights, what we call hit rate of these things is 87%. Of saying teachers are uncreative, they don't deserve more autonomy, we must de-skill them even more. Why are we even paying them? Let's reduce their salaries. And the idea is interrupt it immediately. If there's a letter to the editor in the newspaper, same thing. You have one day to write a response, even to a weekly rural newspaper. So this is national. So one of the things we're trying to do is to say, what are the preconditions for teachers to do this? And if they are attacked all the time, it will be much harder. So because we've got about 250 what are called critical media fellows, we've said there's certain things we can do. There's certain things people in teacher education can do. But I'm no longer the chair of the undergraduate teacher education program at my university. But I do have the voice. I'm on public radio all the time responding to talk radio about this, where people will call in and say, I listened to you and you're defending these stupid people. Okay? Or my teacher is not liked, so people will call in also defending teachers. And my task is to say what, sort of argue in a nice way, in a populist way, actually. So the task in many ways is to say what needs to go around, to circulate, so that teachers are now seen in ways that enable them to engage in it. Now that's one part of a project. So when I say relational analysis, what I mean is exactly this. What's the connection between the media's presentation of teachers and teacher education, and teachers being frightened of doing certain things? What's the way that we can begin to take one piece of that and transform it? Because the other piece, in-school stuff, will not be able to be transformed unless we transform the way teachers are looked at. Okay? So you have to connect it with its transformations within schools as well. So I could go on. I've written a lot about this. But again, this is hard work because it requires that we actually work across disciplinary boundaries and work in ways where we have to think about, how would I work with a journalist on this? How do I write in a way so it doesn't require the Apple dictionary for it? Okay? So again, it's one of the most important questions we can ask about how do you provide the space for this? If you read the piece, I know some of you have in the School of Education, of a piece by Luis Armando Gangin and myself on what's going on in Porto Alegre, one of the things that's going on there is principals of schools are elected by the teachers and the community. I don't know whether I totally agree with that. But when I'm in Brazil, it means that you must have a platform that the teachers agree with, and that the community agrees with, and that the students who have a symbolic vote on it after 4th grade. So these are kids who are 11 and 12 years old, but they have a symbolic voice on it as well. That's really interesting to me as an experiment to see whether involving the community more and having the conversations about critical democratic education with them and answering the questions that they will ask, which are real. Will this hurt my kid on the test? Or will they get a job based on it? Those are not stupid questions in a time of crisis. So I want to try more practical kinds of things of seeing what can we change that give teachers the space in which community members and parents will not say, don't experiment on my kid. Okay? But thanks for a really important question.
I'm sorry, but we have to end. I would like to thank Michael for this truly truly inspiring talk. And I'd like to invite our rector to present a small token of appreciation for Michael being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
More. This is the logo, and this is our tree of science.
Thank you.